when Ember's own pack throws her to the legendary Lycan King as payment for their crimes. She expects death. But Kieran's silver eyes hold something far more dangerous than fury. As the most powerful shifter alive, kneels before a rejected Omega and offers her a choice no one has ever given her before. One question burns between them. Will she choose the crown he's offering, or will her past convince her she's not worthy of the love that could reshape 2 kingdoms? Thunder crashed above the old wooden house as Ember pressed her face against the cold window. The rain hit the glass like angry fists, each drop telling her the same cruel truth: she didn't belong here anymore. At 19 years old, she was still alone, while every other girl her age had found their special person. In her world of wolf people, being alone this long meant something was very wrong with you. Her wolf spirit, Ash, whined softly in her mind like a hurt puppy. Tomorrow night, when the full moon rose high and bright, Alpha Garrett would stand before everyone and say the words that would destroy her life forever. She already knew what he would say: she had to leave and never come back. The house smelled like wet dirt and dying flowers from outside, but inside it smelled worse. It smelled like hate and disappointment. Her own family looked at her like she was broken glass that might cut them. Her mother hadn't spoken to her in 3 days. Her father pretended she didn't exist. Even her little sister Emma whispered mean things behind her back. "Maybe I really am cursed," Ember whispered to her reflection in the window. Her brown hair hung around her face like curtains, hiding the tears that wouldn't stop coming. She was supposed to be an Omega, the caring, gentle type who made everyone feel safe and loved. Instead, she made people uncomfortable just by breathing the same air. As she stared at her reflection, something strange caught her attention. For just a moment, her ordinary brown eyes seemed to flicker with silver light, like moonbeams dancing on water. But when she blinked, they were normal again. Just tired, ordinary brown eyes in a forgettable face. The wind howled louder, making the house shake like it was scared too. Ember wrapped her thin arms around herself, trying to stop the shivers that had nothing to do with being cold. Tomorrow, Alpha Garrett would tell everyone she had to go to the Shadowlands, the scary place where the bad wolves lived and good wolves went to die. She had heard the grown-ups whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. "No one will take her," they said. "She's been rejected by 12 different packs. Even the desperate ones don't want her. There's something wrong with her scent, too unusual, too different." The words cut deeper than any knife ever could. A branch snapped outside, loud as a gunshot. Ember jumped, her heart beating so fast it felt like a trapped bird. Something big was moving in the darkness beyond the trees. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever creature might step into the light. But no monster came. Instead, something worse happened. A familiar scent drifted through the window crack. Alpha Garrett, approaching through the storm. He was coming to deliver the final judgment early. Ash, her wolf, pressed closer to her thoughts like a warm hug from inside. Unlike the people in her pack, Ash had never given up on her. "We're stronger than they think," Ash whispered in the secret language only she could hear. "The silver in our eyes isn't a flaw, it's a gift they don't understand." But what kind of gift made everyone afraid? Ember had been waiting her whole life for answers, and all she got was more rejection and more pain. Every boy who might have chosen her had looked right through her like she was invisible. Every family who might have welcomed her had found excuses to send her away. Heavy footsteps approached the front door. Alpha Garrett's voice boomed through the thin walls, talking to her parents in hushed, urgent tones. Words like problem and immediate solution and no choice filtered through to where she sat. Lightning flashed, turning the whole room white for one scary moment. In that flash, Ember saw something that made her heart stop completely. A pair of glowing silver eyes stared at her from the darkness outside the window. They were too high up to belong to a regular wolf, too bright to belong to a regular person, and they looked exactly like her own eyes had moments before. The eyes blinked once, slow and careful, like they were trying to tell her something important. Then they were gone, swallowed by the storm as if they had never been there at all. Ember stumbled backward, her legs shaking like newborn deer. Had she really seen those eyes? Or was her scared mind playing tricks on her? But deep inside, Ash stirred with something that felt like recognition. The front door burst open with a crash that shook the house. Alpha Garrett's heavy frame filled the doorway, rain dripping from his graying hair. Behind him stood two of his strongest warriors, their faces grim with purpose. "Ember Thorn," Garrett's voice boomed through the small house. "Come here, now." She rose on unsteady legs, her parents appearing from the kitchen with expressions of relief mixed with shame. They wouldn't even meet her eyes. "The situation has changed," Garrett announced, his cold gaze fixed on her face. "The Lycan King demands immediate payment for our territory violations. You leave tonight." Tonight. The word hit her like ice water. She'd expected to have until tomorrow. Time to say goodbye. Time to prepare herself mentally for exile. "Please," she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. "Can't I have until morning?" Garrett's laugh was harsh and without warmth. "The king doesn't wait for broken omegas to get ready. You come as you are, or we drag you." The rain kept falling, but somehow it sounded different now, less like anger and more like a summons. Change was coming whether she was ready or not. And those silver eyes in the storm suggested it might not be the terrible kind of change she had been dreading. As Garrett's warriors stepped forward, Ember felt something shift inside her chest. Fear, yes, but also something else. A tiny spark of curiosity about the creature who had been watching her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. The voice came from the shadows like distant thunder, making Ember's skin tingle with electricity she had never felt before. "You smell like sadness and rain, little wolf." Ember spun around so fast she almost fell off the pack house steps. Her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Standing in the darkness beyond the pack house was the biggest man she had ever seen, easily twice as tall as Alpha Garrett, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moon. But it was his eyes that made her forget how to breathe. Silver like moonlight on water. They seemed to glow with their own inner fire. The same silver she'd seen in her own reflection. The same silver that had watched her from the storm. I'm sorry," she stammered, dropping her gaze to her bare feet like she had been taught. "I didn't mean to bother anyone. I was just, look at me." The command was soft but impossible to ignore. When she lifted her eyes, she saw a face that belonged in the scary stories grandmothers told children. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in dark stubble, and hair black as midnight that moved in the wind like it was alive. "King Kieran," she whispered, recognizing him from the pictures she had seen in the pack's history books. The Lycan King, the monster who ruled the Shadowlands and commanded an army of creatures that regular wolves feared to name. He stepped closer, his massive boots making no sound on the wet ground. "Your alpha called for me." "Something about territory problems and old debts that need paying." His voice rumbled like an earthquake deep underground. "But I find something much more interesting than politics waiting in his front yard." Ember took a step backward, her survival instincts screaming at her to run. Everything about him radiated power that made her Omega nature want to curl up in a tiny ball. But there was something else too, a carefully controlled gentleness in the way he moved, like he was trying not to scare her more than he already had. "What's your name, little Omega?" he asked, tilting his head to study her with those impossible silver eyes. "Ember Thorn," she said, surprised that her voice worked at all. "But I'm nobody important. Just someone who's leaving tonight." Something flickered across his face, anger, maybe, or disappointment. When he inhaled deeply, testing her scent, his eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Leaving? Or being thrown away? Before she could answer, the pack house door slammed open with a bang that made them both turn. Alpha Garrett stumbled out, his shirt half-buttoned and his hair messy from sleep. When he saw King Kieran standing on his porch, All the color drained from his face like water from a broken cup. "Your Majesty!" Garrett practically fell down the steps trying to bow properly. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow night. If I had known, I don't like to wait when I'm curious about something," King Kieran said, his voice turning cold as winter ice. "Tell me about this Omega you're throwing to the wolves tonight." Garrett's eyes darted nervously between the king and Ember. "She's nobody, Your Majesty. Just a defective girl who can't find a mate. We're sending her to the Shadowlands where she belongs." Defective. King Kieran repeated the word like it tasted bad in his mouth. He moved closer to Ember, and she caught his scent pine forests and winter storms, and something wild that made her wolf stir restlessly. "Because she hasn't been claimed by any of your impressive young men?" The way he said impressive made it sound like the opposite. Ember bit her lip to hide a smile that wanted to break free despite everything. "She's been rejected by 12 packs, Your Majesty," Garrett continued, puffing out his chest like he was proud of this fact. "Her scent is wrong, unnatural. Clearly the moon goddess has marked her as unworthy. We're just following divine will." King Kieran's nostrils flared as he breathed in Ember's scent again. This time, his reaction was unmistakable. His pupils dilated and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice held an edge that made even Garrett step back. "Unworthy," he repeated slowly, "because her scent carries moonlight and starfire instead of common earth and flowers." Ember's head snapped up. He could smell that? The thing that made everyone else uncomfortable. He saw it as something special? King Kieran was quiet for a long moment, those silver eyes studying Ember like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve. When he finally spoke, his words made her world tilt sideways. "I'll take her." "What?" Garrett and Ember said at the same time, their voices cracking with shock. "Your territory violations have cost my people time and resources," King Kieran explained calmly. "I could demand gold, land, or blood as payment. Instead, I'll take the Omega." Ember's legs almost gave out completely. This was worse than exile to the Shadowlands. This was being given to the most dangerous creature alive, like she was a piece of furniture or a hunting dog. "But Your Majesty," Garrett sputtered, "she's just a worthless..." "Careful." The single word came out so quietly that it was somehow more terrifying than any shout could have been. Power rolled off the Lycan King in waves that made the very air shimmer. "I don't like hearing my property insulted." His property. The words hit Ember like physical blows, making her stomach twist with fear and something else she couldn't name. But when King Kieran looked at her again, his expression softened just enough to confuse her completely. "The choice is yours, Ember Thorn," he said, extending a scarred hand that looked like it could crush rocks without effort. "Stay here and face whatever punishment your alpha has planned. Or come with me to a place where unusual things are sometimes valued instead of feared." She stared at his outstretched hand, her mind spinning with impossible choices. Behind her, she could hear Garrett breathing hard with relief that his problem was solving itself. Around them, the rain continued to fall, washing the familiar sense of her childhood away into the darkness. "What happens if I come with you?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "That depends on what you choose to become," he answered, and something in his silver eyes promised that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Ember looked back at the pack house one last time. Through the window, she could see her parents watching from the shadows, relief and shame warring on their faces. They wanted her gone. They'd always wanted her gone. She turned back to King Kieran and placed her small hand in his much larger one. The moment their skin touched, electricity shot up her arm and silver light flickered in both their eyes. "I choose to come with you," she said, and meant it. The storm clouds overhead rumbled with approval, as if the sky itself was pleased with her decision. The massive iron gates of the Shadowlands fortress slammed shut behind them with a sound like thunder. Ember's heart pounded as she stared up at the towering black walls that now trapped her with the most feared shifter in existence. King Kieran walked ahead without looking back, his boots echoing on ancient stone that seemed to whisper secrets of 1,000 years. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his deep voice bouncing off the walls. The word home should have felt like a lie when everything around her screamed danger, but somehow it didn't. The first shock came when they entered the main hall. Dozens of Lycans filled the space, not the savage beasts from children's stories, but elegant creatures with human faces and wolf eyes that tracked her every movement. They wore fine clothes and stood with perfect posture, but their teeth were too sharp and their stares too assessing. "A new pet for the king?" sneered a woman with silver hair and claws that clicked against her wine glass. "How? Quaint." Ember's wolf whimpered inside her mind, but not with fear this time, with annoyance. Ash didn't like being called a pet any more than Ember did. Kieran stopped walking. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, and that familiar silver light flickered in his eyes. "Lady Morgana," he said without turning around. "Perhaps you'd like to repeat that comment?" The silver-haired woman's face went pale. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I meant no disrespect." "Good." Kieran's voice stayed calm, but power rolled off him like heat from a fire. "Because Ember is under my personal protection. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me directly." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Every Lycan in the hall suddenly found something fascinating to stare at that wasn't Ember. She felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. Why was he defending her? What did he see that the others missed? An elderly man with kind eyes stepped forward. "Your Majesty, shall I show Miss Ember to her quarters?" "Thank you, Marcus." Kieran finally turned to look at her, and she saw something unexpected in his silver gaze. Not ownership, not pity, something that looked almost like hope. "You must be tired from the journey." Marcus led her through hallways, lined with paintings of wolves, running under full moons. But these weren't the crude portraits she'd expected. They were beautiful, depicting wolves with silver eyes and coats that seemed to glow with inner light. Wolves that looked like they could heal instead of harm. "Those are the true healers," Marcus explained, noticing her fascination. "Ancient wolves with the power to mend what others would break. There haven't been any for over 200 years. Ember paused in front of one portrait, a woman with eyes exactly like her own, surrounded by light that seemed to pour from her hands. "What happened to them?" "They were hunted," Marcus said sadly. "Other wolves feared their power, thought it was unnatural. The last known true healer died protecting a village from a plague that would have killed hundreds." A chill ran down Ember's spine. The way other wolves reacted to her scent, their discomfort with her presence. What if it wasn't because she was defective, but because she was something they instinctively recognized and feared? "Here we are," Marcus said, opening a door that revealed the most amazing room Ember had ever seen. A 4-poster bed with silk curtains dominated the space, while huge windows overlooked gardens that sparkled with moonlight. It was bigger than her entire house back at Crescent Moonpack. "This can't be right," she whispered. "I'm just a rejected Omega. I don't deserve." "The king specifically chose this room for you," Marcus interrupted gently. "The East Wing is reserved for honored guests and family." Family. The word hit her differently this time. Not like a loss, but like a possibility. After Marcus left, Ember sat on the edge of the huge bed and examined her hands in the moonlight streaming through the windows. They looked so ordinary, but when she concentrated, she could swear she saw the faintest silver glow beneath the skin. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting a servant. Instead, King Kieran filled the doorway. Up close, he was even more intimidating than before, but there was something careful in the way he held himself, like he was trying to appear smaller and less threatening. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, staying by the door. "Why are you being kind to me?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "The room, the protection, the way you look at me. What do you want?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those penetrating silver eyes. "Has anyone ever been kind to you without wanting something in return?" The question caught her off guard. She thought about it, searching her memories for even one example. Her pack had fed her because omegas needed to stay alive to serve. Teachers had educated her because it was their job. Even the few friends she'd made had always asked for favors eventually. No, she admitted. Then maybe it's time someone was. He stepped into the room, but stopped several feet away from her. I know what it feels like to be alone, Ember. To have power but no one who cares about you as a person. To be surrounded by people who only see what you can do for them. His honesty stunned her. This was the Lycan King, the most powerful shifter alive. How could he possibly understand her life? I brought you here because your old pack was going to throw you away, he continued. But I also brought you here because something about your scent, your presence, calls to my wolf in a way I haven't felt in centuries. I think you might be something special, Ember. Something rare and precious that your old pack was too blind to recognize. What if I'm not? What if I'm just broken like they said? He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. Then you're broken in the same way I am, and maybe broken things can help each other heal. The words settled into her chest like warmth spreading through cold bones. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her not just kindness, but understanding. If I decide I want to leave, she asked, testing the boundaries of this new reality, then I'll personally escort you anywhere you want to go, with enough gold to start whatever life you choose. The promise should have made her feel better, but instead it made her more curious than ever. No one had ever offered her genuine choices before. Get some rest, Kieran said, moving toward the door. Tomorrow you'll meet the rest of the court. Fair warning, they're going to test you. Not because they're cruel, but because they need to know if you're strong enough to survive here. What if I'm not strong enough? He paused in the doorway, his expression serious. Then I'll teach you how to be. But I have a feeling you're already stronger than you know. After he left, Ember lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside her window, she could hear the sound of wolves howling in the distance. But instead of the lonely sound she remembered from her old life, these howls sounded like songs, like a pack calling to each other across the darkness, welcoming a new member home. As she drifted toward sleep, silver light danced behind her eyelids, and for the first time in years, her dreams were full of hope instead of fear. Blood dripped from Ember's split lip as she picked herself up off the training ground for the 5th time that morning. Vera, King Kieran's head warrior, circled her like a shark-smelling weakness. The other Lycans watching from the sidelines didn't bother hiding their amusement at the Omega, who thought she could learn to fight. Again, Vera barked, her amber eyes gleaming with cruel delight. And this time, try not to telegraph your moves like a child playing dress-up. Ember wiped the blood away and raised her fists. But something was different this time. The silver light behind her eyes was growing stronger, responding to her frustration and pain. She could feel Ash stirring restlessly, wanting to emerge and show these arrogant Lycans exactly what kind of wolf they were underestimating. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at the fortress, and every single day brought new challenges designed to test her limits. Combat training that left her bruised and bleeding. Etiquette lessons where she was mocked for not knowing which fork to use. Political discussions where every word felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. But the worst part wasn't the physical pain or the endless humiliation. It was the way Kieran watched everything from a distance, never interfering, never offering help, just observing with those silver eyes that gave away nothing of his thoughts. Vera's fist connected with Ember's ribs, but this time Ember was ready. She twisted away from the follow-up strike and landed a solid punch to the Lycan's shoulder. Not enough to do real damage, but enough to surprise everyone watching. Better, Vera admitted grudgingly, but still pathetic. How did our king ever think you were worth saving? The words stung, but they also ignited something fierce in Ember's chest. Maybe he sees something you don't. Like what? Your amazing ability to bleed all over my training mat? This time, when Vera attacked, Ember didn't just defend. The silver light behind her eyes flared, and suddenly, she could see everything. The slight tensing in Vera's left shoulder that telegraphed her next move, the way her weight shifted to her back foot, the split-second opening when her guard dropped. Ember moved faster than she ever had before, ducking under Vera's swing and landing a perfectly placed strike to a pressure point at the base of the Lycan's neck. Vera stumbled, her eyes wide with shock. "What the hell was that?" one of the watching Lycans muttered. "Lucky shot," Vera snarled, but uncertainty flickered in her amber eyes. The training session continued, but something fundamental had shifted. Ember was no longer just surviving the attacks she was learning, adapting, growing stronger with each exchange. The silver light guided her movements, showed her weaknesses in her opponent's defenses that shouldn't have been visible to someone with her limited training. By the end of the session, she was still covered in bruises, but Vera was breathing hard and sporting several marks of her own. "Enough for today," Vera announced, but there was newfound respect in her voice. "Same time tomorrow, Omega. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because you got lucky once." As the training ground emptied, Ember remained standing in the center, testing the way the silver light responded to her will. It was definitely getting stronger, more controlled. But what exactly was it? Impressive improvement. She looked up to find Kieran approaching, his expression unreadable. He'd appeared without making a sound, moving with the deadly silence that marked all true predators. "You were watching the whole time," she said, not quite making it a question. "I watch all my people train. But yes, I was particularly interested in your progress today." He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the approval in his silver eyes. "You stopped holding back." "I was never holding back. I was just learning." "No," he said firmly. "You were hiding. From them, from me, from yourself. Today was the first time you let anyone see what you're really capable of." The words hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. "And what am I capable of?" Instead of answering directly, Kieran gestured for her to follow him. They walked through parts of the castle she'd never seen before, down stone steps that grew older and more worn with each level. The air grew colder and heavier, filled with the scent of ancient magic that made her skin prickle. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To show you something that might explain what happened in training today." They stopped in front of a massive door covered in carved symbols that seemed to shift and move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Kieran placed his palm against the center symbol, and the door swung open with a groan that echoed through the corridor. The room beyond took Ember's breath away. It was a vast library, but not filled with ordinary books. These tomes glowed with their own inner light, and the very air hummed with power. At the center of the room stood a pedestal holding an open book whose pages seemed to write themselves. "The Chronicle of True Healers," Kieran explained, his voice reverent. "It records the life and abilities of every true healer who has ever lived." Ember approached the pedestal cautiously, drawn by something she couldn't name. The pages were covered in elegant script that seemed to shift between different languages, but somehow she could read every word. Her breath caught when she saw her own name appearing on the page, letter by letter, as if an invisible hand was writing her story in real time. "Ember Thorn," she read aloud. "Born under the blood moon to parents who carried dormant healer bloodlines, marked by silver light and the ability to see weakness in both flesh and spirit." "Keep reading," Kieran encouraged softly. "Powers awakened through trauma and acceptance. Combat abilities enhanced by healer's sight can identify vulnerable points in opponents and predict movement patterns through micro-expressions and energy flow." Ember looked up at Kieran, her mind spinning. "This is why I could suddenly fight better today. It's not that I got stronger, I started seeing differently." "True healers aren't just about mending wounds," Kieran explained. "They understand the body so completely that they can identify exactly where and how to strike for maximum effect. Ancient healers were often the finest warriors in their packs because they knew better than anyone how to stop a threat quickly and efficiently. But I don't know how to heal anyone yet. The abilities manifest differently in each individual. Some start with healing, some with combat sight, some with emotional perception. They're all connected different aspects of the same fundamental power. Ember turned back to the chronicle, watching as more text appeared. But this time, instead of describing her past, it seemed to be showing possible futures. Images flickered across the pages herself, with hands glowing silver as she healed wounded warriors. Standing beside Kieran as they addressed a great gathering, teaching young wolves to control similar powers. "This is what you saw in me that night," she said, understanding flooding through her. "Not just an Omega to be saved, but a true healer to be awakened." "I saw potential," Kieran confirmed. "But you're the one choosing what to do with it." As they climbed back through the castle levels, Ember felt the last of her old doubts falling away. She wasn't broken or defective. She was something rare and powerful that her old pack had been too ignorant to recognize. "Tomorrow I want to start healing training too," she said as they reached her corridor. Kieran smiled, and this time it was warm with pride. "I'll arrange for you to meet our chief healer." "But Ember?" "Yes? Don't let power change who you are at heart. The kindness and compassion that drew me to you, those are just as important as any ability you might develop." "What if the abilities change me anyway? What if I become someone you don't recognize?" Kieran stopped walking and turned to face her fully. For a moment, his careful control slipped, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his silver eyes. "Then I'll love whoever you become," he said quietly. "Just like I'm falling in love with who you are right now." The words hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ember's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized this wasn't just about awakening her abilities anymore. It was about two people finding something worth fighting for in each other. "Kieran," she whispered. "I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you need time to figure out your powers, your place here. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give." Instead of answering with words, Ember stepped closer and placed her hand over his heart. She could feel it racing beneath her palm, could sense the careful restraint he was exercising to give her space and choices. "What if I'm ready for more than you think?" she asked. This time, when he smiled, it transformed his entire face from controlled and distant to warm and wonderfully alive. "Then we take it one day at a time and see what develops." As she entered her room, Ember caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her reflection showed a young woman with silver light dancing in her eyes and confidence in her posture. She looked nothing like the broken Omega who had arrived 3 weeks ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new opportunities to grow into the person she was meant to be. But tonight, she was simply a woman falling in love with a man who had seen her true worth when no one else could. The future had never looked brighter. Blood dripped from Ember's knuckles as she pounded against the training dummy for the 3rd hour straight. But this time, the pain felt different, not like punishment, but like progress. Each strike was more precise than the last, guided by the silver light that now flowed through her as naturally as breathing. "You'll break your hands before you break that thing," came a deep voice behind her. She spun around, sweat flying from her hair. Kieran stood in the doorway of the training room, but he looked different tonight. His usual perfect control seemed cracked around the edges. Dark circles shadowed his silver eyes, and his black hair stuck up like he'd been running his fingers through it. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, breathing hard. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent wild storms, and something that made her wolf wake up and purr with contentment. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you leaving. I'm not going anywhere." The words came out more forcefully than she'd intended. "Aren't you?" His voice dropped to almost a whisper. 5 packs have sent marriage offers in the past week. Rich alphas who could give you normal lives, normal families. not a monster who's lived too long and carries too much blood on his hands. Ember's heart clenched. She'd heard about the offer's fancy letters with gold seals that arrived every few days. Marcus had mentioned them, expecting her to be pleased. Instead, she'd thrown them all in the fire without reading past the first line. "Do you want me to leave?" she asked. Kieran's jaw tightened. "I want you to be happy." "That's not what I asked." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the training mats. The air between them felt electric, like right before lightning strikes. Then Kieran moved not toward her, but to a wooden chest in the corner of the room. "My first mate died 300 years ago," he said, lifting the lid with careful hands. "Killed by silver arrows while protecting our pack's children from vampire raiders." Ember's breath caught. He'd never talked about her before. Not really. Just hints and shadows that made her chest ache with jealousy she had no right to feel. Her name was Isla. His voice went soft and distant. She had red hair that caught fire in sunlight, and she laughed like music. "I thought I'd die when she did." Wanted to, actually. From the chest, he pulled out a silver necklace. Not fancy or expensive looking, just a simple chain with a small wolf pendant. But the way he held it like it might break if he breathed too hard made Ember's throat close up. "I buried this with her," he continued. "But every full moon for 2 centuries, I'd go to her grave and dig it up, hold it for hours, trying to remember what her voice sounded like. Pathetic, right?" "No," Ember whispered. "It sounds like love." His eyes met hers, and she saw centuries of pain there, carefully hidden, but never truly healed. 10 years ago, I finally left it buried. Thought I was done with that part of myself. Then you showed up, smelling like rain and moonlight, and suddenly I'm 17 again, terrified of caring about someone who might disappear. Kieran, I have enemies, Ember. Ancient ones who'd love nothing more than to hurt me through someone I care about. Vampire lords who still remember Isla's death and blame me for the war that followed. Rogue Lycan clans who see any attachment as weakness to exploit. His hands clenched into fists. If they found out about you, really found out what you mean to me, they'd come. And I might not be strong enough to protect you the way I couldn't protect her. The confession hung between them like smoke. Ember felt her wolf pressing against her ribs, wanting out, wanting to comfort the pain she could smell rolling off him in waves. "Show me," she said suddenly. "What?" "Your wolf. You've seen mine a dozen times during training, but you never shift around me. Why?" Kieran's whole body went still. "Because I'm not like other wolves. The change, it's different for Lycans. Bigger, more dangerous, more intense. Show me anyway." He shook his head. "You don't understand. I'm not just an alpha, Ember. I'm what alphas have nightmares about. There's a reason other packs whisper my name instead of saying it out loud. I'm not other packs." Something in her voice must have gotten through to him, because his careful control finally cracked. The change started slow, his eyes going from silver to molten gold, his fingernails growing into claws. Then it sped up, bone stretching and reshaping until the man was gone, and something incredible stood in his place. Kieran's wolf was massive, easily 3 times the size of any she'd ever seen. His fur was midnight black with silver streaks that caught the torchlight like stars. But it was his eyes that took her breath away. Still gold, still undeniably his, but ancient in a way that made her feel small and protected at the same time. Most wolves would have dropped to their bellies and whined. Ember stepped closer. "Beautiful," she breathed, reaching out to touch the soft fur behind his ears. The wolf Kieran made a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl. He pressed into her touch like he was starving for it, and she felt the careful restraint it took for him not to overwhelm her with his size and power. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, running her fingers through his thick coat. "Not your wolf, not your enemies, not your past. The only thing that scares me is the thought of you pushing me away, because you think I can't handle what comes with loving you." The word hung in the air like a dropped stone. Love. She'd said it without thinking, but now that it was out there, she couldn't take it back, didn't want to. Kieran shifted back to human form in a rush, and suddenly she was touching bare skin instead of fur. His hands came up to cup her face, and she could see everything in his eyes, want and fear and something that might have been hope. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you," she said, and watched his careful control finally shatter completely. When he kissed her, it was like lightning and thunder rolled into one moment, fierce and gentle, desperate and patient. 300 years of loneliness poured into the space between them, met by 19 years of her own isolation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ember saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible. More than is probably safe for either of us." "Then we'll be dangerous together," she said, and meant it, as they held each other in the training room, surrounded by the scent of sweat and determination. Ember felt something settle into place in her chest. This wasn't just about awakening her abilities anymore, or finding her place in a new pack. This was about two damaged souls choosing to trust each other with their hearts. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but neither of them noticed the dark shapes moving through the forest, drawn by the scent of new love and ancient power finally awakening. The attack came at dawn when the night guards were tired and the day shift hadn't started yet, exactly like Alpha Garrett would plan it. Ember woke to the sound of breaking glass and her wolf howling danger in her head. Kieran was already moving, grabbing weapons from under the bed faster than human eyes could follow. "Stay here," he ordered, pressing a silver knife into her hands. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or Marcus." But as soon as he disappeared down the hallway, Ember heard something that made her blood freeze, a child screaming. The orphan pup they'd taken in last month, little Thomas, who still had nightmares about his parents' death and slept with a stuffed bear named Mr. Fuzzy. Without thinking, Ember ran toward the sound, bare feet slapping against cold stone. The screaming was coming from the nursery wing, where 6 orphaned children lived under their protection. She burst through the nursery doors to find chaos. 4 wolves, ones she recognized from her old pack, had cornered the children in the far corner. Thomas stood in front of the younger kids, his 7-year-old body shaking but his little face set in fierce determination. "Get away from them," Ember snarled, and her wolf pushed so close to the surface that silver light flickered in her eyes. The lead wolf, Beta James from her old pack, turned and grinned with too many teeth. "Well, well, the runaway Omega thinks she's tough now." "The children have nothing to do with this." "Everything to do with this," he said, taking a step toward Thomas. "Your mate killed 6 of our warriors last month when we tried to reclaim our stolen territory. Time for payback." Understanding hit her like ice water. This wasn't just an attack, it was revenge. And they were going after the most innocent targets they could find because they knew it would destroy Kieran if the children were hurt. "You want me? Take me," she said, dropping the silver knife and holding up her empty hands. "Let the kids go." "Oh, we'll take you," James said with an ugly laugh. "But first, we're going to show your precious Lycan King what happens when he steals from the Crescent Moon Pack." He lunged toward Thomas, claws extended. Ember moved faster than she'd ever moved in her life, throwing herself between the beta and the child. James's claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through skin and muscle like paper. Pain exploded through her body, but something else exploded to power she'd never felt before. Silver light that blazed from her skin like liquid starfire. The world shifted, colors becoming brighter, sounds sharper. When she looked at her attackers, she could see exactly where they were vulnerable, exactly how to disable them without permanent harm. "What the hell?" James stumbled backward, his wolf form flickering with confusion and fear. Ember didn't waste time questioning what was happening. The power flowed through her like moonlight through water, guiding her movements with precision she'd never possessed. She moved like liquid silver, using her smaller size and new abilities to her advantage. The first attacker went down when she hit a pressure point that sent him into unconsciousness. The second stumbled when she somehow disrupted his inner ear balance, causing him to crash into the wall. The third froze completely when she touched a nerve cluster that temporarily paralyzed his limbs. But James was stronger, faster, and desperate. He managed to catch her arm in his jaws, biting down hard enough to crack bone. "You always were weak," he growled around, his mouth full of her blood. "Even with whatever weird magic this is, you're still just a broken little Omega who—" He never finished the sentence. A roar shook the entire building, and suddenly Kieran was there, not in human form, but as the massive Lycan she'd seen the night before. He moved like black lightning, slamming into James with enough force to crack the stone wall. "Mine," the Lycan snarled, and his voice was barely recognizable as Kieran's. "Touch what's mine and die." The remaining attackers tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Vera and a dozen Lycan guards had surrounded the building, cutting off all escape routes. Ember. Kieran shifted back to human form, but his eyes still burned gold with fury. "Are you hurt?" She looked down at her torn shoulder, the bite marks on her arm, the silver glow that was already fading from her skin. "I'm okay, but the children." "Safe," said Vera, appearing in the doorway. "We've secured the building. These were the last of them." "How many total?" Kieran asked, gathering Ember against his chest like she was made of glass. 15 wolves, all from her old pack, plus 3 rogues they hired as backup. Vera's eyes were grim. "This was coordinated, Your Majesty. Someone gave them detailed information about our defenses, our schedules, where the children sleep." Ember felt her heart stop. "What are you saying?" "Someone inside helped them," Kieran said quietly. "Someone who knew exactly when and how to strike for maximum damage." The implications hit her like a physical blow. There was a traitor among the Lycans. Someone who'd sold out their own pack for revenge against her. "The children," she said suddenly, pulling away from Kieran's embrace. Several of the orphans were crying, and she could smell their terror in the air. Moving on instinct, Ember knelt beside Thomas, who was trying to comfort a little girl with tears streaming down her face. When she placed her hands on the child's shoulders, silver light flickered again, but gentler this time. The little girl's sobs immediately quieted, replaced by wonder as the healing energy soothed not just her physical scrapes, but the emotional trauma of what she'd witnessed. "How do you feel?" Ember asked softly. "Better," the girl whispered. Like the scared feelings went away. Around the room, other children had gathered close, drawn by the same instinct that made hurt animals seek out natural healers. Ember moved from child to child, using her awakening abilities to mend cuts, soothe bruises, and calm traumatized minds. "Incredible," Vera breathed, watching the transformation. "True healers can mend hearts as well as bodies." But the effort was draining. By the time Ember had helped the last child, she was swaying on her feet, exhaustion pulling at her like lead weights. "That's enough," Kieran said firmly, catching her before she could fall. "You're burning through your own life force." "They were so scared," Ember murmured against his shoulder. "I couldn't leave them like that." "And that's exactly why you're going to be an incredible queen," he said softly. "But first, you need rest." As he carried her from the nursery, Ember saw the faces of the Lycans they passed. Where once there had been suspicion or dismissal, now there was respect, awe even. Word was already spreading about what she'd done, not just fighting to protect the children, but healing their trauma afterward. "A queen?" she asked weakly. Kieran's arms tightened around her. "If you'll have me, if you'll have us." Through the windows, she could see the sun rising over the Shadowlands, painting everything in shades of gold and silver. Soon there would be investigations to conduct, a traitor to find, defenses to strengthen. But for now, there was just this being held by the man she loved, knowing she'd found her true power not just in magic, but in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Yes," she whispered as sleep finally claimed her. Yes, to all of it. Blood covered everything. But this time, Ember's hands remained steady as she pressed them against a young wolf's torn shoulder. The silver light that flowed from her fingers had grown stronger over the past month, more controlled, more precise in its healing touch. "Don't let me die," whispered the boy beneath her hands. He couldn't be older than 16, with freckles scattered across his pale cheeks like stars. "Please, I don't want to die." "You won't," Ember promised, and this time she knew how to keep that vow. The power flowed through her like warm honey, knitting torn muscle back together and sealing wounds that should have been fatal. Around the courtyard, other wounded wolves lay scattered like broken dolls. The second attack had been worse than the first coordinated strikes on 3 different locations simultaneously, designed to spread their forces thin and maximize casualties. "Where did you learn to heal like that?" asked Maya, one of Kieran's warriors, watching in amazement as the boy's wound closed completely. "I'm still learning," Ember said honestly. Over the past weeks, Marcus had been teaching her to control and direct her abilities. But moments like this still felt like miracles even to her. Maya knelt beside her, amber eyes wide with something that looked like reverence. "My grandmother used to tell stories about true healers. She said they could bring wolves back from the very edge of death." "Sometimes," Ember admitted, moving to the next injured wolf, a young woman about her own age, with deep gashes across her stomach. But it cost something each time. She was learning that lesson firsthand. Each healing drew from her own life force, leaving her drained and vulnerable. But seeing the relief and gratitude in the wounded wolf's eyes made every sacrifice worthwhile. Heavy footsteps approached, and she knew without looking that Kieran had returned from interrogating the captured attackers. His scent reached her first pine trees and rain, but overlaid now with anger and something darker. "How many?" His voice sounded like gravel. 8 dead, 19 wounded, Maya reported, standing to face her king. "Could have been twice as many if not for the early warning system you implemented." Kieran's eyes found Ember, who was placing her hands on the wounded woman's stomach. This time, she felt the familiar warmth flowing out of her, but it was easier now, more natural. The woman's eyes fluttered open, confusion replacing pain. "I feel whole again," she murmured, sitting up slowly. "How is that possible?" "True healer magic," Kieran said, pride threading through his voice despite his grim expression. But Ember could see the worry in his silver eyes as she swayed slightly from the effort. "I'm fine," she said before he could voice his concern. "Just tired." "You're burning yourself out," he said softly, concern overriding his alpha authority. "We need to find another way to—" "There is no other way," Ember interrupted, already moving toward the next wounded wolf. "These are our people, our family. I won't let them suffer when I can help." But even as she spoke, she could feel the truth of his words. Each healing was becoming harder, taking longer to recover from. There were limits to even true healer abilities. By the time she'd treated the last injured wolf, Ember's legs were shaking and her vision blurred at the edges. Kieran caught her before she could collapse, sweeping her into his arms with gentle strength. "That's enough for today," he said firmly. "The others will heal the normal way." "But they're in pain, and you're dying," his voice cracked with emotion. "I won't lose you to save people who will survive anyway." The words hit her like cold water. Dying. Was that what this feeling was? This bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to pull at her very soul? Kieran carried her to their chambers now, since she'd moved in with him 2 weeks ago after officially accepting his proposal. The room smelled like both of them, a comforting blend that made her wolf purr contentedly despite her exhaustion. "Tell me about the interrogation," she said as he settled her onto their bed, propping pillows behind her back. His jaw tightened. "The attacks aren't random. Someone is coordinating them. Someone who knows our defenses intimately." He sat beside her, taking her hand in his much larger one. The captured wolves mentioned a figure they called the Shadow. Someone who promised them gold and revenge if they could break our forces. "Any idea who it might be?" Too many possibilities. Old enemies, rival kingdoms, ambitious Lycans who think they could rule better than I do. His thumb traced circles on her palm, a soothing gesture that spoke of growing intimacy between them. But whoever it is, they know about you now, about what you can do. The implication made her stomach clench with fear. They'll target me specifically. They'll try. His silver eyes hardened with determination. Which is why we're accelerating the timeline. What timeline? Kieran was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. The binding ceremony. It would make you not just my mate, but my true queen. The power shared between us would make you stronger, harder to kill. Ember's heart hammered against her ribs. The binding ceremony was the Lycan equivalent of a wedding, but far more permanent and magical. It would link their life forces, their powers, their very souls. That's a big step, she said carefully. Too big? There was vulnerability in his voice that made her chest ache. I know we haven't known each other long. I know you might want more time to… Yes, he blinked. Yes, it's too big? Or, yes, you need more time. Yes, I'll bind with you. She smiled at his shocked expression. Did you really think I'd say no to spending forever with the man I love? The joy that transformed his face was worth every risk, every danger they might face together. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate relief of someone who had been afraid to hope. When? She asked when they broke apart. 3 days. Under the full moon, with the pack as witnesses. His hands cupped her face with infinite gentleness. Are you sure? Once it's done, there's no undoing it. We'll be connected until death separates us. Then we'll just have to make sure death doesn't separate us for a very long time, she said, and meant it. As the sun set outside their windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Ember felt something settle into place in her chest. Not just love, though, that burned bright and constant between them, but purpose, belonging. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. In 3 days, she would become not just Kieran's mate, but the queen of the Shadowlands. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. Outside, wolves howled their evening songs to the rising moon, and for the first time since the attacks began, the sound was pure joy instead of mourning. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Forever. The binding ceremony took place in the ancient stone circle, deep within the Shadowlands forest, under a full moon that seemed to approve of the proceedings by shining brighter than Ember had ever seen it. She stood in the center of the circle wearing a gown of silver silk that caught the moonlight and reflected it back like captured starfire. Around them, hundreds of Lycans from across the kingdom had gathered to witness their king claim his queen. Kieran faced her in ceremonial robes of midnight blue, his silver eyes reflecting the same light that danced in hers. Between them lay an ornate chalice filled with wine mixed with drops of their blood, the physical symbol of the bond they were about to forge. Before we begin, announced Elder Thorn, the ancient Lycan who would perform the ceremony, let all present know that this binding cannot be undone by mortal means. What we join tonight will last beyond death itself. A murmur of approval rippled through the assembled crowd. These were their people now, Ember realized. Wolves who had accepted her not because she was born to royalty, but because she'd proven herself worthy through her actions. Kieran Blackthorn, Elder Thorn intoned, his voice carrying across the clearing. Do you take this woman as your true mate, your equal in power, your partner in leadership? I do, Kieran said, his voice strong and clear. I offer her my protection, my devotion, and half of all I am. Ember Thorn, the elder continued, do you accept this bond knowing it will change you forever? Do you accept the crown that comes with loving a king? Ember looked out at the faces surrounding them Lycans who had become her family, children she'd helped heal, warriors who now looked to her for guidance. 3 months ago, she'd been a rejected Omega with no future. Now she stood on the verge of becoming their queen. I do, she said, her voice carrying across the stone circle. I accept the bond, the crown, and all the responsibilities that come with both. Elder Thorn lifted the chalice. Then drink, and let the moon witness your union. Kieran took the chalice first, sipping the wine and blood mixture before passing it to Ember. The liquid was warm and slightly metallic, but the moment it touched her lips, power exploded through her body like lightning. Silver light erupted from her skin, but this time it was different. Stronger, more controlled, enhanced by Kieran's own abilities, flowing into her through their forming bond. She could feel his wolf merging with hers, two halves of a whole finally coming together. The crowd gasped as matching silver light began to emanate from Kieran's skin. For a moment, they were both creatures of pure starlight, their individual powers combining into something greater than either had possessed alone. When the light faded, Ember felt fundamentally changed. She was still herself, but more as if she'd been living her entire life at half strength and had suddenly awakened to her full potential. "It is done," Elder Thorn announced, his voice reverent. "Long live King Kieran. Long live Queen Ember." The crowd erupted in howls of joy and approval, voices raised in celebration that echoed through the forest and beyond. But Ember barely heard them. She was too lost in Kieran's eyes, seeing her own amazement and joy reflected there. "How do you feel?" he asked softly, his hands finding hers. "Complete," she said, and realized it was true. The restless ache she'd carried her entire life, the sense that something was missing, had finally disappeared. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. But eventually, the crowd began to disperse, couples and families heading home or to guest quarters throughout the castle. "Ready to go home, my queen?" Kieran asked, offering her his arm with mock formality. "Home?" Ember repeated, testing the word on her tongue. "I like the sound of that." They walked back to the castle together, but instead of going directly to their chambers, Kieran led her to a part of the building she'd never seen before, a tower room with windows on all sides that offered a panoramic view of their kingdom. "I wanted to show you something," he said, guiding her to the eastern window. Spread out below them, the shadowlands stretched to the horizon, but they looked nothing like the wasteland she'd heard described in stories. Under the moonlight, she could see thriving villages, cultivated fields, forests full of healthy wildlife. Children played in safe streets while their parents worked and loved and lived without fear. "This is what we've built together," Kieran said softly. "Not just in the past few months, but over centuries of careful progress. A place where different kinds of wolves can find belonging." "It's beautiful," Ember breathed. "You helped make it so. Your healing abilities, your compassion, your insistence on seeing the good in people, it's changed how our subjects see themselves. Children who were afraid are now brave. Adults who felt hopeless now believe in tomorrow." She leaned against his side, marveling at how perfectly they fit together now that their bond was complete. "What happens next?" "Whatever we choose to make happen." His arm tightened around her waist. "We have a kingdom to rule, healing academies to build, alliances to forge with neighboring territories, and someday, if we're lucky, children of our own to raise." Children. The word sent a thrill of possibility through her. Little ones with silver eyes and gentle hearts, growing up in a world where being different was celebrated instead of feared. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to face him fully. "And I love you," he replied, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness. "My queen, my mate, my heart." As they stood together in their tower room, surrounded by the kingdom they would rule and protect together, Ember felt the future stretching out before them like an unwritten book. There would be challenges, there always were. Other kingdoms to negotiate with, internal disputes to mediate, enemies who would try to exploit any weakness they could find. But they would face it all together, the rejected Omega who became a queen, and the lonely king who learned that true strength came not from ruling through fear, but from inspiring others to be their best selves. Through the windows, she could see other couples walking home from the celebration. Children playing in moonlit courtyards, guards protecting their borders with pride instead of mere duty. This was what love looked like when it grew beyond two people, a transformation that touched every life it encountered. No regrets? Kieran asked softly, echoing words he'd spoken months ago. Ember looked around their tower room, at the evidence of their love's impact visible in every direction, at the man who had seen her worth when no one else could, at the bright future they would build together, one choice at a time. Only one, she said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. I wish I could go back and tell that scared girl in the rain that everything was going to work out better than she ever imagined. She wouldn't have believed you. No, Ember agreed, smiling against his lips. But she would have hoped, and sometimes hope is enough to carry us until the miracle arrives. The moon continued its journey across the star-filled sky, blessing their kingdom with silver light that seemed to promise endless tomorrows. And in their tower room, two souls who had found their perfect match in each other began planning the bright future they would build together. One healing touch, one wise decision, one act of love at a time. The Shadowlands had never been more alive with possibility, and their story was just beginning.